Good evening, folks, and welcome. Thanks very much for coming in. Hi, Mr. Cat Doll. Sarah's not on tonight, Doll, because she's editing and online shopping for the team. So she's doing that kind of thing. But here we are with our monthly spot of Karen's Book Corner with our resident author and absolutely delightful lady, Karen Perkins.
Hi, thank you.
Hey.
And as usual, we've got Shelley and our partner in crime beside her, Sam, as always. So tonight, Karen's going to be reading from 3 individual books. I'm not going to tell you which ones they are. I'll leave it up to Karen. And feel free to pop any questions in the chat for Karen about any of the books. So without any further delay, and you don't need to listen to me anymore because it's Karen's corner and it's Karen talking. So it's over to you, Karen Doll, and on you go.
Right, well, thanks very much, Scott. And hi, everybody, and thanks so much for coming along, whether you're here live or join us after. It's always wonderful to see the comments in the boxes afterwards, and I do read them all. And please do comment and ask questions as we go along, and I'll do my best to answer. And as I do the readings, as Scott says, I'm planning to read from 3 different books today, from 3 different series. So again, any questions, and Shelley and Sam, if you have any comments, please do let me know. So I thought, well, before I waffle on anymore, I shall start with Divided by Witchcraft, which is one of the Pendle Witch short stories. Now, if you've been following us a lot, you know that we've done an awful lot of work on the Pendle Witches with Shelley, my partner in crime there. As both in Forgotten Pendle, when we're looking at all the different things behind the scenes, and that isn't really always shown in the stories, and also the individual people behind the stories, because we sometimes forget that actually these were real people and real events and real lives that were destroyed and ended by these events. Now, Divided by Witchcraft is about one of those people, or one of those sets of people who are often forgotten in the tale of the Pendle Witches. And they're the Samlesbury Witches. And they are a little bit different to the main trial, because where the main trial was a Protestant searching out Catholic witches, in the Samlesbury witch trial, it was a Catholic priest searching out Protestant witches. So we had the equal and opposite reaction there, in a way. So I'll start with the first chapter. This is Divided by Witchcraft. It is Old Guys, and I have a little bit of an exclusive because they have new covers. Ta-da! So these are the new covers that we have for Murder by Witchcraft. I can't move both. There we are. Murder by Witchcraft and Divided by Witchcraft. So they're actually live now. What do you think?
Very nice, very smart, though. Very smart.
Thank you. Bit more colourful.
So
they're now available print and also Kindle, and they're now also available for Kobo, Nook, Apple Books, as well as audiobooks. So whatever your favourite format is, you can get hold of it. So I shall start with chapter 1. It's Sunday, the 5th of April, 1612. I couldn't understand what all the fuss were about. It were a bit more interesting to hear the words in English instead of Latin right enough. But St. Leonard the Less was a bear. No bugger cracked a smile, and all the dour faces and plain clothes were, well, less. The church had been named well. There'd been naught to look at. The words just droned on after a bit. Why were Mam fighting so hard with Granny Janet and Aunt Ellen over which church to sit in? Folk just like to do things their own way, that's all. God were the same wherever we sat, weren't he? What evil is this? I blinked in the sunshine and stopped short at the words. That was Mam's voice. Bugger, oh, for it now, right enough. I shrank back into Aunt Ellen's side, but naught could save me. The tall, stooped man standing with Mam spoke. and I gasped as I recognised Father Christopher. No, wait, I went to call him Father Christopher. North Southworth, for that matter. Master Thompson. That was Thompson with the name we were supposed to call him. Grace Sowerbutts, don't be so rude, daughter. Listen when you are spoken to. I felt heat in my face at Mum's rebuke as I realised the father had been talking, heard out of his words. He blew out a breath in frustration. Young Grace, I am sorely disappointed in you. You betray not only your family, but your faith, your Lord God, and your Saviour. I stared at him. He had the loudest voice I'd ever heard. He looked about him, then took my arm and led me down the lane where it were more secure. I heard man tiding Gronet and Ellen as they followed. The father lowered his voice. When I was told about the proliferation of witchcraft and the devil's works in this great county of Lancaster, I did not expect to find such wickedness so close to home. He looked up, staring past me, not only amongst my brother's tenants, but my own nephew's widow. I started as his voice rose once more and glanced around. Aunt Ellen's friend, Mistress Jane, were glaring at him with such ferocity. I couldn't decide if she were vexed, frit, or just hated the father. Maybe a bit of each. She walked towards us. Christopher, she said, it is not like you to visit the true Church of England. I stared at the father in amazement. He turned a very odd colour, one I'd never seen on a man's face before, not even Pa's when he found me with Stevie Armstrong in A-Loft. How dare you, he hissed. I follow the true religion of our king and of our queen before him, she said, and I stared in amazement at her daring to speak to him like this. You have betrayed your true faith, the father continued. Which? Mistress Jane stared at him. So it is true then, you are behind the rumours. I had been told as much, but could not believe you would so malign your dear nephew as to slander his widow with such blasphemy. You are the blasphemer, not I. You and your friends here. He pointed at Granny Janet and Aunt Helen. And if that were not enough, you are blackening innocent souls. He grabbed hold of my arm and I squealed in protest. I looked over at Mam for help, but she were glaring at Aunt Ellen. There'd be hell to pay for me sneaking off with them. Why ever had I listened to Granny? Well, I promise you, you shall not have this young soul, and I shall do everything in my power to ensure you do not spread the devil's corruption any further. I shall stop you, mistress, all of you. He glared once more at the three women, then whirled about, still clutching my arm, and pulled me along the lane. Ma'am, I cried, and she looked at me, stretched out a finger to hook the curl of hair I'd been sucking on out of my mouth in a quick movement, then took my other arm. Don't dawdle, Grace, you disobeyed me. I told you not to go with your aunt and Granny. I warned you against visiting their church. Father Southworth, Mistress Sowerbutts. Begging your pardon, Father, Master Thompson. The father nodded, but I noticed the colour in his thin face was still high. Master Thompson has kindly agreed to learn you your prayers. The father winced. I shall teach you your prayers, Grace, and you shall learn well. Now at my mum's turn to colour. The coming week is the most important time of the year, Grace. You know that, don't you? I nodded. I knew today were Palm Sunday with Holy Week coming up, the last week of Lent. In 7 days we could eat meat again. It had been far too long since my last taste. You shall visit me regularly for spiritual instruction and tutelage. I stared at him and glanced at Mam, dumbfounded to see her nodding. Surely she would not do this to me. She briefly bowed her head. I thank you, Father, but I fear we cannot pay for that much learning. As you know, we are but tenants of your good brother, Master Thomas, and this has not been a good spring for anyone working the land. Hush, mistress, there will be no cost to you. This is my solemn duty. It may not be too late for her soul. She may not yet be a demoniac. I shall rid her of the malign influences she has been subjected to. And you, my girl, shall vow to never succumb again to the promise of false worship. I nodded my agreement, knowing by the strength of man's grip on my arm that I could do naught but agree. Christopher Southworth tightened his lips into somewhat akin to a smile. That is good. It shall be my pleasure, no, my honour, to save such a promising young mistress from the encroaching evils of Protestants and witches. And there it begins. And it's quite a story, isn't it, Shelley?
It really is, Karen. I do apologise for the background noise there, but I had thought I didn't realise the mute was still on. It just kept on clicking off. But no, it really is a fascinating story with Grace.
Yeah.
You know, just like all the other young girls like Janet as well. In it. We just kind of go through the
shows how much power the figures of authority just had over them and what they were manipulated to do. Because that story, the priest who's a Jesuit priest in hiding, so that's where all the priest's holes come into at Salisbury Hall. And he manipulates this young girl, Grace Albert, who was about 14 at the time, into having her own grandmother, her aunt, and Christopher Southworth's niece, who is his real target. And there are some horrendous stories that come out of it, some really, really depraved things they were accused of doing. So it just chills. It's even writing it, it just gave me chills writing it to realise that I was bringing to life something that had actually really happened. This was not coming out of my imagination. This was really happened.
Yep. It's almost as hard to believe about the manipulation, you know, to get his own way. That was as bad as what she was actually blamed for, you know, what she was blamed for in the first place, what they were all blamed for in the first place. You know, that's quite just as bad. And so when you're reading the story, you think, who's the actual criminal here, you know? You get really invested in the stories that the individual characters and that Grace Sauerbach, sorry, she was just a victim.
She was, yes. Well, in my opinion, she was, yes. And obviously the priest had his own agenda, but then he'd been in prison for many, many years in dungeons and experienced the worst of humanity as well, as a victim of that. But then the arrogance of thinking that he could do this, he could use the courts and the magistrates and the Protestant courts and the courts of King James to rid himself of his nephew's widow. So, but
such a sad story.
Yeah.
Sorry, Ellen, you got.
Just say, on you go, Scott.
He probably just thought, you know, he could do what he wanted because now it's minded the church behind him. You know, and obviously
he had the Catholic Church behind him, which was illegal in the country at the time. They weren't. If you didn't go to the Protestant Church of England, then you were fined and possibly put in prison as well. So a few years after the gunpowder treason, there was an awful lot of anti-Catholic feeling, especially from King James. So for a Jesuit Catholic priest to be doing it shows just how much support he had in the locale as well, in the vicinity of Salisbury and Pendle and Lancashire. So the north of England don't change their ways very easily, do we, guys? Neither does Scotland. I really just realised I just said north of England, but I meant north of Britain. The north of England, we don't change. I am sorry.
Sorry, man. I think we can be quite stubborn as well at times.
Yeah.
You know,
be a northern trait.
Especially back then, you know, going back centuries, I think the Scots were quite stubborn and stuck up for their beliefs, and you know, I mean, we're seeing that with William Wallace and what have you. But let's not turn into a history lesson about William Wallace in Scotland against England. I've seen Braveheart. I know how it turned out.
Absolutely. Are there any questions about either the books or about writing in general or an author's life?
If you've got any questions, just pop them up in the chat.
What I'm going to say is in June, we are planning a marathon live from, it'll be 6 p.m. on Friday, 6 p.m. on Sunday. Any money raised is going to go to charity. We're going to be holding some raffles as well through the weekend. And one of the prizes for the raffles, kindly donated by some author, I don't know, I'm not sure. Perkins, Karen Perkins. It's actually signed and personally decorated by the author herself, is on Murder by Witchcraft and
Wow.
Parliament of Roots. These have been signed and nicely decorated. As you can, I can't even turn this one round. There you go.
So you've got a set of Murder by Witchcraft and Divided by Witchcraft there, and also
that's a great prize, Karen. Well done,
with
thank
my
you.
own personal seal.
Oh, that is absolutely fantastic.
So they will be a raffle prize in our I'm not plugging the live, I'm plugging your books, Karen. So they have been kept under lock and key since I received them. So thank you again, Cam, for them.
Guys, I hope they find a good time.
I'm sure they'll find a lovely one lucky person.
It's a great prize. Fascinating book. So and I've read them obviously. So anybody.
Oh, we'll be testing you, won't we, Shirley?
You'll be testing me, yes, you will.
Yes, we have on Friday. Is it 7 o'clock on Friday? We have a Pendle quiz where I'll be asking the questions.
I think it's actually. Did you?
So you had a seal, Karen?
Yes. Well, for the book, I mean, I love research, and I must admit, I go over the top, not only with books, because it's a great excuse to just fill more bookshelves with more great books, but also the practical side as well, because you can learn so much from reading it, but then actually putting it into practice. So I got some sealing wax and all the paraphernalia just to see what it actually took to do the seals. So of course I had to get one with my initials on, and it's got a feather as well to represent the quill, and also which harks back to Janet's ink pot, which I've mentioned before, which triggered that series of books, and actually what they show in the movies where they put it over a candle and heat the wax over the candle and then dip it on, that doesn't work because the candle wax gets mixed in as well and it makes a mess. Yeah. So it's always good to just do it in practice and don't believe Hollywood either. So I have my own personal seal, and so to put it to good use, every book that I personally sign and send out, whether bought through my own website, whether through the Paranormal and History website, they all have that personal seal on as well as the signature inside. So
such a lovely personal touch, Karen.
Yeah, it takes ages, but I love doing it. They've got to look their best when they leave the house. They really do.
Oh, people appreciate that kind of thing as well. They do. They really do. They appreciate that personal touch because it's quite easy to buy the books off of the shelf or through the internet, but to have that actual personal touch direct from the author just means something.
Yes, it
something
does.
Special.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Just as Karen was saying there about the quiz, it's on Friday, 7 p.m. The PIH Pendle quiz, because as Karen said earlier, we've been covering Pendle so much over the past, I don't know how many months, quite a while, with Pendle and then forgotten Pendle, and then we're off to Pendle start of July. We decided to, we've always been the ones doing the interviews, asking people like Karen, Simon, Danny Moss, Charlotte, about Pendle. So we decided, why don't we turn the tables round and get somebody to ask us the questions on Pendle, just to see how much we've actually learned and listened over the past so many months. I thought, well, there's no better person to quiz us than the lady herself. So that's 7 o'clock on Friday. Karen will be hosting the live, and we will be the guest on panel.
Brilliant. So I've got some homework to do before then, get the questions ready, but I'm really looking forward to it.
Oh, it'll be brilliant.
It'll be a different experience.
Yeah.
Especially
So,
after all the talking we've done about Pendo and all the different characters, it's really good to be able to make sure that the information that we've gained is never lost.
Yes, yeah, because it's such a fascinating story, such a fascinating part of history and of humanity as well. Just shows what we can all do to each other, given the worst.
we never really think Pendle is just a story of, the arrest, the trial, the execution, but there's so much more behind the scenes there that people don't, either don't know or they've kind of forgotten about. And, it's really great to be able to bring it to light. And that's what we're going to Pendle the 9th of July. We arrive in Pendle. And we're not going to be focusing on the usual spots. We're going to be focusing on different, places. But that's for July, folks. That's for July. Sherry's, it's not that far away. The year's flying. I mean, it's May already. I mean, it's getting there. Assuming the lovely wax seal signed copies of Karen's books are not possible to get in Canada.
Well, yeah, I can post to Canada, but there is the postage, of course. So I'll find out how much that is, Sherry, and let you know. Thank you.
Right, Sherry, and the quiz sounds, well, we're hoping it's going to be fun as well. Yes. And not a trial by ordeal, or whatever it is you call it. Ellie, carry on, though. The show's yours tonight.
Right, thank you. Right, well, moving from Pendle, I thought we'd come back to Yorkshire and Thrushcross Reservoir, or Thor's Cross, as I call it in my books. Now, the last book corner that we did, I read from The Haunting of Thor's Cross and talked about how the books all came about when I found the ink pot that I held up earlier, buried in a dry stone wall on the shores of this reservoir. Now the reservoir, the whole place, it's very, very dear to me. It is beautiful. If you get a chance to have a look, either on my Facebook group or on my website, which is Karen.Perkins.Karen, just some of the pictures of the landscape. And that was my childhood playground, both around the sides of the reservoir, on the reservoir, and quite often in the reservoir as well. There are a lot of stories around there, especially in Yorkshire Moors. There's the stories of the fairies and the giants. They all still burble along under the surface, and especially stories of witches.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Janet is the main historical character within that series of books, and in The Haunting of Thor's Cross, that shows her life as she was, where she was used badly by one of the large families in the isolated village, which is now below the waters of Thor's Cross, or waters of Thrushcross, should I say. And things don't go very well for her. It's fair to say she has a hand in her own undoing as well. She doesn't always take the most sensible of decisions, as none of us ever do. But it was pretty harsh. She was left alone, and instead of the community coming to help her, it violated her instead. And that story itself, it was itself inspired by the Pendle witches and the way community can turn against on one another, and especially in the past and in these very isolated communities, which there were up in the moors. So Janet is my latest full-length novel, and it's book number 3 in the Ghost of Thor's Cross series. Book number 2 is Curse, which is a shorter short story. And in Janet herself is finding her way back, and she is fixated on her children, the children that she wasn't able to have. And she wants to find a way to bring them into the world and actually finally give birth to them. Well, at the same time, still exacting vengeance on the Ramsgill family. Now, it's a dual timeline novel, and the past timeline in this case focuses on the Ramsgill family in the 1930s. So it starts in 1936. and with a character of old Ma Ramskill, who came about in Curse, and she's a real favourite. I don't know where she's come from, but she is real dear to my heart, and I bet I'm going to grow into her as I grow older. So I shall start with chapter 1, which is Ma Ramskill in the 30s. And then also just delve into the next chapter, which focuses on Emma, who's in the present day. And they are both haunted by Janet, but 70 years apart, 80 years apart even. So chapter 1. Journal, Wednesday, 1st of July, 1936. I've fallen again. I know it. My body feels different. My breasts are tender, and it's not the time for them to be so. We have another little one on the way, despite my age. We have another chance at a child. Jack's face were a picture when I told him the news. It were good to see him happy. I reckon he's suffering more with his knees than he's letting on. The promise of another young'un's put the bounce back in his step. Curses and witches be damned. It were bad luck to lose the others, true enough. But I have John and baby Maggie in the cradle, and now a third on the way to join them. I'll defend them all with every breath of my body. Drag them through every day of life if I have to. By heck, it's grand to have a bit of sunshine, Ma Ramskill said as she shuffled to Rample Bottom into a more comfortable position on the old milking stool and leaned back against the stone wall of Eastgate House. She turned her face to the sun and closed her eyes in simple pleasure of feeling the warmth on her skin, then checked baby Maggie sleeping in her pram beside her. Aye, best make the most of it. We get precious little, was the response from Biddy Moore, her cousin Wilf's wife, as she shifted her weight on one of Ma's kitchen chairs. Dot handed yarn and needles to her mother-in-law and made sure Ma had everything she needed before taking a seat herself. She placed a hand on her swelling belly, still taken by surprise by the changes in her body and how she moved. She called Ma's boy John over to assist with winding the next hank of yarn into a ball, and he perched at her feet, arms outstretched, used to the routine. Ma nodded her approval at him as she sat her needles clacking, and he lifted his chin. Even at 4 years old, he knew such praise was not given lightly and should not be taken so either. He sat as still as he could, listening to the sound of the women talking to the rhythm of their stitches without paying attention to the words. His focus was on the moor which stretched above and beyond the farmhouse. He only needed to grow a little more before his pa would take him on the daily rounds of sheep and cattle, and he was desperate, in the way only a young lad can be, to be taken to the village sheep washing later in the month. His father had been talking about it for weeks already. Thousands of ewes would be sent through Thor's Ford to wash their fleeces, and it was a great excuse for a party with pies and sausage rolls, and maybe even cakes. He brought his attention back to his mother as he heard the magical words, Yorkshire show. Nay, I ain't going this year, Ma said to Biddy, and John's face fell. Baby Maggie won't stand going all that way in the sheep wagon. Shame it's over in Beverley this year, Biddy said. Aye, too far for me to go and all in my present condition. Jack won't risk taking me, not after the losses. Reckon he'll take Wilf with him. It's still worth taking the best topsower. A prize there makes a hell of a difference to the sale price. Biddy stared at Ma, a slow smile spreading over a weather-beaten face. Ma, did I hear right? Dot exclaimed, her hand back on her belly. Are you at family way and all? Aye, lass, that I am. Don't go getting excited, though. Thee knows my luck with babbies, although we should raise a glass to it all the same. I thought Maggie were my miracle babby. I never expected to fall again, but it happens. She glanced at John, who was sitting with his arms resting on his lap, still supporting a hank of wool. Go on in with you, lad. Get the mam a bottle of Peel's best. One each for the ounce and all. She watched John extricate himself from the yarn and scurry off to do her bidding, then turned back to the two women. Jack would say we should be drinking tea, but there's nought better for growing a babby on a summer's day than good Yorkshire stout. I were weaned on it, I were. It ain't quite the same since old Jessie passed, but beggars can't be choosers. Dot raised her eyebrows in surprise, but Biddy had heard these sentiments before, many times. How did your Jack take news? Biddy asked. Ma pursed her lips. He don't know what to think. It's maybe our last chance for another. I'm getting on now, 45 last birthday. To be honest, I was surprised I fell again. Thought for sure baby Baggy here would be the last. But it ain't born yet, so no use getting overexcited. John made his way down the front steps, his pudgy arms full of stoneware bottles of stout, brewed just up the lane at the stone house. Each woman took one, pulled the cork with her teeth, and enjoyed a long gulp. Aye, that's grand, that is. So what do you think about having a little brother or sister, John? He shrugged and glanced at Maggie in her pram. Won't do much bar give muck and noise, he said, bit like a pig squealing when it don't get what it wants. Dot giggled, then sobered. What did you mean earlier, Ma, about your luck with babbies? I know you lost one before John were born, but him and Maggie look like good Ramsgill stock. Ma sighed, and Biddy shot her daughter-in-law an annoyed glare. I should have 8 brothers and sisters, John said. I heard Pa say so. Is that right? Biddy asked. I didn't realise it was so many. Aye, after Robbie and Ricky made the teens and went off to the Great War, the next one died soon after birth and the rest didn't make it that far. Our John here's the strongest of the lot, ain't they, John? Aye, that I am, Ma. John puffed his chest out and Ma handed him a bottle, which he took in both hands to swig a mouthful of stout. Her face softened as she watched him, then fell back into its habitual frown. Dot stayed silent, her yarn forgotten and both hands on her belly. Ma noticed and leaned forward to place a hand on her forearm. Don't fret, lass. It's a Ramsgill curse. Moors are free of it, and so's your family. The farmers ain't lost many over the years, and I can't see as they'd start now. I'm sure that and these carrying will grow up to be playmate to our John here. Mayhap even a bride. Let's hope so, Biddy said, placing a stout on the ground beside her and picking up her knitting needles once more. What do you mean by a Ramsgill curse? Dot asked, her hands still cupped around herself. Well, it said Ramsgills were cursed years ago by a witch who lived just up there at Wolf Farm. Ma nodded towards a derelict house overlooking them from 100 yards up the hillside. Jenna, her name were, she went on. Any road, she took umbrage with one of Jack's ancestors, wanted him for her sen, so the story goes, and couldn't handle him not wanting her back. So she cursed him and all the Ramsgills who came after him. Sounds a bit far-fetched, Dot said. Aye, well, there's more to the story than that, Ma. Biddy put her needles down. I heard you left her pregnant. Ma shrugged, like as not. Any road, most Ramsgill babbies have been lost since. How many? Dot asked. Well, I don't rightly know, Ma said, looking thoughtful. It might be an idea to find out, Biddy said. See what he's up against. Ma didn't respond or change her expression, but glanced at John and baby Maggie as she raised her stout to her lips, then cursed as she spilled the black liquid down her front. Buggeration! Biddy and Dot winced, but Ma was the one woman in the valley who could get away with the profanity, or at least the only one nobody but the vicar challenged about it. The reason for Ma's mishap fast became apparent as the day darkened, a great shadow engulfing the women in night. As one, they exclaimed in surprise and fear and jerked their faces heavenward. A gargantuan shape passed overhead, its oval body eclipsing the sunlight from the moors. A low drone filled the valley, as if the airborne Leviathan was escorted by a nest of gigantic hornets, fantastic beasts, powerful and deadly. What is it, Ma? John cried, rushing to her side and pressing himself as close to her as he could. Is that ruddy German airship again? Ma exclaimed. Hindenburg, whatever it's called. See, at the back there, those symbols mean it's German. John stared at the angular black swastikas on the red tail fin, dully menacing in their contrast to the silver of the bulk of the hull, now reflecting the sun's rays as the airship progressed across the Yorkshire sky. His mouth hung open at the sight, longing to know what it was like to float above the moors like that. There's no aeroplanes, Biddy said. Last time there were aeroplanes with it. You got British ones. Do you think they know it's here? Dot whispered. Must do, Ma said. After the Great War, they ain't just going to let the Germans do whatever they want. True enough, Biddy nodded. True enough. The three women silenced as they thought of the fathers, sons, cousins and brothers they'd lost in that conflict. They shuddered as the Zeppelin's shadow traversed the moors, its speed steady, its progress relentless. Funny how that thing came over when we were talking about curses, Dot said. Oh, don't start getting maudlin on us, lass. Germans have naught to do with Janet's curse. Not even that irritating little Austrian bugger can do out about her, no matter how much he stamps and shouts. His mam should have given him a good hiding when he were in Nipper, Biddy said. That would have sorted his nonsense out. The other women nodded their agreement, but said no more. Chapter 2. Present day. Emma clawed her way out of sleep, desperate to get away from those images, that sound. Emma, what is it? Why are you screaming? What is it? Dave asked, his concerned face pale in the dim light. He rolled away from his wife to turn on the bedside light, then wrapped his arms around her and pulled her close. Emma, tell me. The bell, Dave, the church bell was tolling. No, it was a dream, Emma. That's all, a nightmare. Emma shook her head. It was more than that. Dave pushed her away so he could look into her eyes. That business is done and dusted, Emma. Everything's been fine for 5 years. Don't start it all up again. Emma cradled her head in her hands. Doesn't matter. And anyway, what do you mean don't start it all up again? I didn't start anything. Janet did, and she's back. No, she isn't. I was wondering how long it would be before you did something like this. What? Irritation was fast replacing Emma's fear. Dave shrugged. The reservoir's all but empty. The village is resurfaced, and your haunted house is repaired and lived in, and all at the same time. It's no surprise that would trigger nightmares. I guess, Emma said, calming. Have you heard anything? No. Are you sure? Don't lie to me about this. Not again, Dave. This is no time to stick your head in the sand. I'm sure, and my head is free as sand, see? He shook his head. Not a grain. Emma softened despite herself and allowed him to pull her close. I've not heard anything resembling a church bell, not even in a dream. She is not coming back. The inkpot is gone, and you're not depressed anymore. You're stronger now. Good point. Although we're not stronger, Emma thought. Dave held her at arm's length again. Okay? Emma nodded. Okay. Can we go back to sleep now? I'll just check on the kids first. Well, put your own light on then. I'm away back to sleep. Dave switched his lamp off and snuggled down under the covers. He stared after Emma as she left the room, feeling unnerved despite his earlier reassurances.
Brilliant.
Just you sit here just, literally on and no move and listen to it. You know what I mean?
I'll tell you, Scott, when you're reading the book, it's just the exact same. You don't put the book down. You're literally going for a cuppa and then coming back. I mean, that story there, the Doll's Cross, is so emotional because you feel so sorry for Janet for what she went through. But at the same time, you kind of listen to everybody else's the story, the couple that moved in and their story, in the present day.
Mm.
It's just fascinating. It really, really is.
Yeah.
And
It's really difficult to know what to. Sorry, it's really difficult to know what to make of Janet, isn't it? One thing you want to hug her, on the other you want to slap her, and she's. I think
she was forced into her life. She was forced into being an independent woman and trying to make ends meet herself, and that was through no fault of her own. That was just her circumstances, And then people took advantage of her, and through that, then because of the power, they were able to manipulate the full of the village, and she was just then. It is such an important story. and it's such an emotional story.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what that noise was.
This will sound sort of kind of daft, but it kind of brought back a childhood memory for me with giving the kids the stout,
Right.
because my gran loved stout. Personally, I thought it was disgusting, but we basically giving the kids the stout. It takes me back to, that my gran tried to feed the stout all the time, they just kind of triggered, thoughts of my gran drinking a stout, and do you want to try some, son, and stuff like that,
It was very common, especially before Calpol was invented.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I mentioned there that the stout was brewed by Jesse Peel from the Stonehouse. That's actually true. They did brew their own stout there in that village, and it would be, And I don't think it's just Yorkshire and Scotland who are the same. I think it's quite common.
We have a drink called Sweetheart Stout, and it's well known for pregnant ladies. I don't know, and that's the kind of drink they say, well, if you're pregnant, you can have one of them.
Right? Oh, I didn't know that.
Sweetheart Stout.
Right.
Did you know that, Scott?
Well, Sweetheart Stout, I've heard of that. Even though I'm still a kind of young nipper, I have heard of Sweetheart Stout. I've read about it in books. Sweetheart Stout. But how long obviously you've done numerous books, but how long does it take usually from start to finish a book with your research to actually, type the end?
It takes me quite a long time, especially because I write about so many different parts of history, and I have to get the history right. So it's not just the details of what actually happened, but it's the details of how the people lived at that time and place. What clothes did they wear? What would their house look like? What did they eat? What did they drink? What words did they use in greeting? So an awful lot of background research that I need to do. So when I have the idea, it's normally two things coming together. And when that happens, and it just goes bang, and then my head just whirls. It just hits the ceiling, and I get the very basic plot overview of the book. It just downloads, and it just comes very, very quickly. So I kind of have to write that all down, and then I kind of sit on it for about a year or two while I'm finishing off the books that I'm already writing. Although the best ideas, I keep going back to them as I think of something else, or I see something or read something that would relate to it. So they kind of get padded out a little bit while I'm working on other things.
Mm-hmm.
Then when I start proper, it depends on my health as well. So assuming I'm well, then I'd spend a good 6 months just researching really detailed, making lots of notes and plotting while I'm doing that. So I do a lot of planning and plotting now, especially with the strictly historical novels. And that would take me really about 6 months until I've really got the book planned out, and then probably another 6 months to write it, and that's just regularly every day. And it's a case of when floodgates open, the words will just pour out, and that. So a good year from starting properly, but there's been a lot of thought and imagination gone in beforehand. So it's quite an undertaking, and then there's editing it, of course, as well. So
do you ever get these where you sit down and just think, what's it called, writer's block? You just sit, you sit down at your PC, think, right, here we go, and then you just stop and you think, I don't know what to write.
Yeah. I can struggle, especially at the beginnings of a book, before the characters are really flowing and they're still forming in my head. And often when that happens, it's because there's something that I haven't thought of that I need to get. There's another element that I haven't got yet. So I need to be patient. Often when that does happen, if I'm stuck and I can't get there, I'll actually write the question, what happens next, or what am I missing here? And by asking the question, the subconscious works on it, so then the answer comes. But my normal solution is actually to go out for lunch on my own, or to go out for a coffee on my own, or even to just have a couple of days away in a hotel on my own. Maybe enjoy the pool or what have you, but to be on my, and then just write. So I'm away from all the distractions. I'm away from my computer. I'm just pen and paper. Nobody's there to talk to. So I can either just sit there like a lemon on my own, or I can write, and that's what works. And that has been a bit of a problem the last year or two. But I can put that. I can get started on. I can do that again now. That's started again, and it works for me. I don't know why that is, but
I think you.
Sorry, Sherry.
No, Shirley. I think that sometimes it's important just to take yourself out of the environment that you're in all the time, just to go away and reset yourself.
Yeah. When I'm at home, all I can see is all the jobs that I've got to do, and the to-do list and the reminders and all the rest of it. And it's strange. And I think a lot of writers, not all, but a lot of writers have the same problem. We so desperately want to write all the time, and yet we keep procrastinating and finding other things to do. And I don't know why. It's a very, very strange trait to have. And to answer Sherry's question, to plan a writing series, not at first. And the Thor's Cross books, The Haunting of Thor's Cross was going to be a standalone. And then Cursed came to me. The idea came. I was just away for a little break in the Lake District just for a week, and I was on my own, and it was a lovely hotel with lovely views. And I just sat and wrote Cursed. I don't know where it come from. I had the idea in the morning, and then I spent all day sitting writing, and I had the story by the evening, and that's never happened before. And then I had to do the research and just make sure everything was absolutely right. But a lot of that was stuff that I already knew, because that's set in the 60s when the dam was being built. And I thought that was going to be it. And then Janet woke up again, kept kicking away in my subconscious and demanding another book of her own. So then she got a third book. And I thought that was going to be it. But I did notice she left a way back at the end, which I wasn't expecting, and I didn't plan. That was all her. And she is stirring, so there may well be a fourth coming on that one. But with the Pendle Witch stories and with the Haworth books, then yes, I am planning a series with those. The Haworth books, they'll each be standalones. And there'll be dual timeline novels, so as is the first one, Parliament of Rooks. And there'll be a different set of historical characters each day, each book. But I will be revisiting the Brontes again, and different members of the Bronte family, as well as other aspects of Haworth's history. And the modern timeline in that one, will continue with the same group of three friends, with Verity, who's moved into the Rookery, and then her friends Jane and Lara. And of course, the Pendle Witch books, was always meant to be a series. And because the trials, there were lots of different trials and lots of different accusations and lots of different people who all came together at one assizes, but all had their own stories to tell. And as we all know, when we talk about the Pendle Witches, we talk mainly about Demdike and Chattox. But there were a lot more women, and that's why I started with the shorter books that I did, with Murder by Witchcraft, which is about Janet Preston, who was actually tried twice, and tried in York, but is involved with the Pendle Witches and Malkin Tower, which was Demdike's home, and the Salisbury Witches as well, because Salisbury it's still within Pendle, and it's just down the road from Dewchurch, where most of the main action happens in the main trial, because they tend to get forgotten, and I didn't want to do them afterwards as afterthoughts. I wanted to get their stories out first and to fully concentrate on them. And then I'm doing the main trial now, which was supposed to be a short story, but is turning into a novel. So that's going to take a bit longer than expected.
We both know that's a long story.
Makeup as well. So
Yeah.
was Sid. So yeah. So I was frantically tidying up behind me before we started because I had a sheet of wallpaper all behind me, all with post-its everywhere detailing the whole book. It's a complete mess, but it all makes sense. And yes, so it's definitely
a bit of organised chaos.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Right. But I mean, it is such a vast story. I mean, everybody says a witch trial, it's just a witch trial over and done. But, you know, I've no disrespect to the other witch trials that, you know, happened in the UK over the centuries. But Pendle is such a vast story.
It is, yes. Yes.
It's massive.
Yeah. And because of Thomas Potts's book, who was the clerk at the trials and who recorded it all and published, then a record of what happened has lasted. So we do know, we have full details. Well, full details. We at least have one side of the story.
We've done a lot in Pendle. As we said earlier on, we've done Pendle last year with Danny, Charlotte and Simon, then we've done all Forgotten Pendle, and we're down to Pendle in July. And then I think I spoke to you about it, Karen, the Pendle Trail.
Yes, I'm really, it depends on health, but I'm really hoping to meet up with you there and be able to take part there. That would be fantastic.
We're going to be doing the Pendle Trail, and we're by no means finished with Pendle, you know, because there's a lot more to come.
Yeah.
I mean, get back to your research for your book and the writing and stuff. I was just to try and give people an insight as to how much work actually goes into a book. I mean, I've done it myself. I've been into a bookstore or a library, and you just pick up a book and read it and then put it back. You don't actually appreciate how much effort goes into putting that story together, especially as, you know, you do a lot of history and what have you, get the facts, the dates, the names, the play, everything, you know, spot on. There's a hell of a lot, excuse the French, hell of a lot of work actually goes in before you put pen to paper or, you know.
Yes. I'll do maybe, I was going to say 10 times, but maybe 20 times, maybe even more research than actually ends up in the book, because I need the full picture, but then only the bits that are pertinent to the story actually make it into the book. But I need all that information first of all, so I can build the characters, so I can build the true characters and connect with them as to what their lives were like and what every day was like for them. And literally draw big maps of where they lived, where everybody lived, and an awful lot of detail. And most of it doesn't end up in the book at all. But it all needs doing. And to be honest, I find it fascinating. So, I mean, there is what you're saying about picking a book up, and when I get feedback saying, "Oh, that was wonderful, I finished it in a day, when's the next one?" And part of me is, yes, fantastic, I loved it, and part of it was like, that took me years to write.
I know.
So
you certainly don't make it easy on yourself, Karen.
You give me a chance to write it. One question I'm going to ask you, an author, Karen, back in the early days, you first started to do it. I've seen it in films many times. And, you know, you see the author sitting at the table, trying to write, and the next sort of scene in the film, you see a big pile of paper. It's the bin full of paper, and there's big, you know, like paper balls all over the place. Have you ever been in one of these scenarios where you just went that and throw the...
Well, the first book I wrote was Dead Reckoning, which was one of the pirate books, which I'll read from one of the companions soon. And yes, I mean, there was an awful lot of shyness about publishing. Is it good enough? Self-doubt. Is it ready? Should I do this? Am I kidding myself? All the rest of it. And the number of times the manuscript physically went in the bin, and then the next day, and I fished it out again, and then it went in the bin again, and I fished it out again. And even that was even after I'd rewritten it about 3 times, I think. And it's yes, a lot gets scribbled out, a lot gets chucked. I do get through a lot of paper. I do try. I'd normally write longhand with fountain pen and nice notebook, So I do keep those, and they're on the shelves, and they're there to inspire me. Look, you can do this, and to keep going. But when you look in, the writing's a mess because it's scrawled everywhere. Because when you get into the flow and into the zone, neatness goes out the window, and it's complete flow. And then there's so many sections that are just completely scribbled out and folded over and all the rest. And I don't treat those nice notebooks very well at all. But thankfully, they treat me well.
I used to write years and years ago, and I would start off, writing neatly, and then after about page 3 or 4, the writing would start going down the way.
Yes. Yeah.
And
absolutely.
when you go to the bottom of the page, the writing was like that.
Yes.
She's already like that, But that's many moons ago now. But we'll let you go. You've got a third one for us as well, don't you, right?
I thought I'd read from Look Sharp, which is the first in the series, the Valkyrie series. And that is these are the first books that I wrote. Again, I didn't plan a series. I wrote Dead Reckoning first, then I wrote Ill Wind, and then I wrote Look Sharp. And Look Sharp is number 1 in the series, Ill Wind is number 2 in the series, and Dead Reckoning is number 3 in the series. So I could have planned that one a little bit better. Now, it's in the late 17th century. So it's really when a lot of people were starting to move en masse across the Atlantic to the Americas, to the New World, looking for better lives, undergoing a horrendous journey and such a dangerous journey as well. And especially then, with no technology whatsoever, just literally putting their lives to wood, tar and rope. And they most did it mainly in the search of freedom, but very few found it, especially as an awful lot of people were indentured servants as they went, and enslaved a couple of continents on the way too, which so it's very much a dichotomy of that search for freedom and yet denying freedom to others. Now, Look Sharp focuses on a character called Henry Sharp. Now, it's the most traditional of the 3 books, really. And he is a earl, and he has just inherited a failing estate from his father. And he's also inherited his father's gambling addiction, which is why the estate is struggling so much. He has an uncle, Richard Tarpington, who left for the Caribbees some years before and is running a sugar plantation. And Henry, well, it starts off as Henry Ralston and then takes on a pseudonym of Henry Sharp, follows him to go and join in the venture at the sugar plantation, make his fortune, which can bring back and revive his father's estate. That's the plan, anyway. Because when he gets to, well, he almost doesn't get to the Caribbean thanks to his gambling, but he meets a good friend on the way, Jonesy, who saves him from himself briefly. And when they arrive in the Caribbean, they find that his uncle, Richard Tarpington, has left the plantation to be run by its overseer while he has gone to sea. And he is sailing a ship called the Edelweiss in league with Henry Morgan and some Dutch merchants. And they find each other in Port Royal. And after a drunken night, Henry Sharp finds himself signed on to the articles of his uncle, who is now calling himself Tar instead of Tarpington, finds himself aboard the ship, signed on to his crew, and not quite the life that he was expecting. So I'll start early on. I'm starting with chapter 12. So they found themselves on board and they're just getting to grips with being aboard a ship and aboard a privateer ship as well. So Cheval, here. One of the men dropped the line he was coiling and scampered over to Uncle Richard. I still found it difficult to think of him as Captain Tar, giving me and Jonesy the once-over, one of the most calculating looks I'd ever seen. I glanced over at Jonesy, who raised an eyebrow in reply. I didn't like where this was headed. Cheval, I have a couple of new deckhands for you to train up. Meet my nephew, Henry Sharp, and his good mate, Jonesy. Cheval smiled at us, but I spotted a fleeting glimpse of something else in his eyes before his mouth stretched. Wariness? Distrust? Welcome aboard, he said, his voice accented with French. Cheval will show you the ropes. You'll master the deck before you head into the tops or onto the quarterdeck. The Frenchman visibly recoiled at the mention of the quarterdeck, but I ignored him and smiled at my uncle. Don't let me down, boys. It's serious work. Cheval here will show you how to stay safe. He paused, clearly waiting for Cheval's affirmation, which did not come. Won't you, Cheval? Oui, Capitaine. Sharp here is precious to me. He grasped my shoulder. If anything happens to him, it'll be your neck I string up. I glanced between the two men, realising the first impression Jonesy and I had formed of the Frenchman was shared by my uncle. I narrowed my eyes in confusion. Why would he put us under the care of a man he does not trust? Is it a test? And if so, whom is he testing, Cheval or me? You'll need to shed those coats and boots. Footing's bad enough and bare feet, never mind leather. Gather by the foremast in 2 minutes, then I'll show you how to swab the decks. Cheval grinned, turned his back and sauntered forward. I raised my eyebrows in question at my uncle. I was a lord, for Christ's sake. This Frenchman was having me do the work of a scullery maid. Uncle Richard shrugged. No rank aboard ship, lad, unless captain. Everyone starts at the bottom. You'll find your places naturally. I wouldn't keep Cheval waiting. He has a cruel streak. Jonesy pulled my arm and I let him lead me to the hatch to stow our outer clothing. I glanced back once at Uncle. No, Captain Tar. It was already easier to think that way. Jonesy nudged me. Listen, he whispered, and glanced toward a gaggle of men at the rail. I stopped pushing the Bible-sized block of sandstone over the deck and sat back on my heels, my back popping as I stretched. I looked over and realised Cheval was holding court over half a dozen men. Even had I been unable to understand French, it would have been clear by the amused smirks and frequent glances thrown our way that Jonesy and I were the subject of their amused conversation. I caught the odd word as the Frenchman's voice rose. Babysitting. Nephew. Inutile. Useless. I made to stand and Jonesy grabbed my arm and shook his head. Your uncle has done us a service by introducing you as Henry Sharp rather than Lord Ralston. We have a card up our sleeve. No sense in telling him we speak French. Knowledge gleaned may come in useful later. I nodded, my teeth gritted, and bent back to my task while keeping both ears primed. Say low. I jumped at the shout from overhead. Where away? Came Tar's answering bellow. A league off to starboard. I watched my uncle jump into the ladder of rope leading up the mast, the ratlins, glass to his eye. After a moment, he leaped back down, shouting, All hands, clear the decks, prize to leeward. You heard him. Clear that away and get yourself some weapons. I gaped at Cheval, who laughed. Welcome to battle. Don't worry, the first one's the worst, assuming you survive it. Jonesy took hold of my arm once again and we looked at each other. Neither of us had any words. Go, dump that water overboard and put the Bibles away. Arms and blades are being brought up. Step 2 or you'll be left with the duds. He walked away, still cackling, and Jonesy and I swung into action. Whatever happened now would depend on the gods and my uncle. Chapter 13. Standing at the starboard rail, the ship was clear to see. 2 masts and a hull low in the water. A nice bonus there, lads. Little, I greeted him in surprise. What are you doing here? He shrugged. Dunno. Seemed a good idea last night when I signed the articles. He looked off to the other ship. Not so sure now, though. Neither I nor Jonesy had a reply, and we watched the ship draw closer in silence. Follow my lead, boy, I'll see you right. I started at my uncle's hand on my shoulder and could barely hear his words over the cacophony of the crew shouting, kill, death, blood, an accompaniment to a percussion and weapons striking the rail. I nodded, my mouth dry. Don't mind this. He indicated the bloodlust around us. It's theatre. If you're feeling good, imagine what that crew are feeling, seeing us bear down on them like this, knowing there's no escape. No escape? Jonesy asked. None. Tar indicated the flag now flying at the top of the mainmast. blood red. Tells everyone at sea there'll be no quarter given if they resist. And do they resist? Not for long, boy. Look at those men. They have cannon aboard. They aren't firing. Just as well. She'll make a good prize to accompany us to Sabre, and she's no good to us underwater. But we board as if they'll fight to the death. Tar grinned, and I recoiled at this caricature of the uncle I'd known and admired as a boy. Here. He passed us both a long, wide silk ribbon. Tie each end to a pistol and drape it around your neck. It's easy to bring your guns to bear when your ball won't fall out, even if it's not properly wadded. Probably. He stooped to pick up something else. You'll need one of these too. He handed me a grappling hook knotted onto a line. Throw hard and throw high. Get that secure in their rigging, then swing. Just like when you were a boy, eh, Henry? Still unable to speak in my fear, I could only take the small iron boat anchor and rope. The rope swing I'd used as a boy had been about merriment. This was about battle, death. Nothing like my boyhood games. Tar, I was thinking of him that way most of the time now, clapped me on the shoulder, almost hard enough to threaten an undignified tumble over the rail as our bow cannon exploded with a warning shot. Only Jones's steadying hand saved me. Keep your wits about you, boy. He raised his voice to include Jonesy in little. Your eyes peeled, your weapons handy, and your fear in check. You're privateers now, lads, buccaneers. The seas are rich for a man brave enough to help himself. I nodded, my mouth still arid and lacking coherent speech. Steady, men, on my mark. Tops, covering fire if you please. I jumped as muskets fired above, then again as Tar roared. Go, throw them high, throw them sweet. We'll be rich men come dusk. Screams caterwauled in accompaniment to a multitude of three-pronged iron spikes clanging against each other, then spars. I'd thrown my own with the others, barely realising it, and joined my new crewmates in jumping and swinging. I wondered if their screams were for effect or contained as much terror as mine did. I pulled my blade as soon as I landed, despite falling to my knees, and just managed to parry a blade swinging for my neck. I headbutted the man in the groin and scrambled to my feet, glancing around to see if anyone had witnessed my ungentlemanly conduct. Cheval grinned at me. Why did it have to be him? My heart jumped when I spotted a man with his eye on Tar and bringing his pistol to bear. Capitaine! Cheval shouted the warning, and we both took aim, Cheval belatedly due to his call. My ball felled the man before Cheval even got his shot off. He swung round and stared at me in amazement. That was a hard shot, but I'd have got it myself, you know. I smiled at his attempt to negate his praise and looked around for another target. There were none. The crew were overwhelmed and underarmed. We had the ship. My thanks, Henry. My uncle shook my hand. I didn't realise you're such a crack shot. You'll be in the rigging next time with a barrel full of muskets. 'Twas an easier shot than it looked, Captain. I hastily corrected myself. I glanced over at Cheval, who had flushed bright red in rage. I smiled at him, amused that he hated the thought of another earning praise from his captain. I flicked my eyes lower to his hand, which still held his gun, now pointed at me. Do you intend to use that? Cheval, Tar reprimanded. The Frenchman's jaw worked furiously. He looked like he was chewing the words he did not quite dare utter. Then he lowered the gun. I laughed as the ball fell from it, unable to help myself in the relief of the fight being over. My mirth proved infectious as the men nearby realised what had happened and joined in. I could almost see Cheval's fury turn to hate, and my laughter died in my throat. I had made an enemy this day, and something told me he was not a man to let go of a grudge lightly. Sharp! I turned at James's shout, then burst into laughter once more. To replace the one you lost overboard at Bristol, he said, as he presented me with a perfectly curled periwig. And there is his introduction to life on the open seas.
Wow, that's so different. It's so different. Obviously, I've not read that one, so it's so different to hear a different kind of subject.
Yeah.
Do you feel like it's easier to write, like, talking about all the research that you've had to do? I know you're a lover of the sea and been on the
Yes.
boats. Did you
Yes.
feel that you already had so much knowledge anyway before you started writing the series of books? Or
Well, I
do you
thought
feel
I
it was
did. I
until you
thought I
started?
did. But I used to sail dinghies, and I was very, very keen. That's why I grew up on around Frostcross Reservoir for the sailing club there. So I loved
Yeah.
boats from a very young age, and that carried on into adulthood. Even competing in national and European championships, I took it very seriously, and it was my life. But after an injury at those championships, I couldn't sail anymore. But I couldn't let go of that love of sailing and that desire to sail, and that just because that was where I felt free, just on the side of a boat, just the wind, just me on the knife edge, on the balance, screaming along, and spray everywhere, and it really took a lot to let go of that. And then I remembered who I
Because
was
I
as a
can,
child. I remembered who I was as a child when I in my first little boat, a mirror dinghy, and I had a little skull and crossbones flag at the top of the mast, sailing around pretending to be pirates. I thought, oh, I'm
Mhm.
going to have to write a pirate story. And I wanted the ships themselves to be as much a part of the story as the characters, and to show just how important the ships were. So they were actually sailing them, because let's face it, that was the only thing keeping them alive. Their every waking moment, and actually their sleeping moments as well, would have been
Mhm.
completely concerned with the ship, with where she was going, where they were, was she seaworthy, was she sound, were there any problems. And so it really infuriates me when I read pirate book and the ship's hardly mentioned, and the life of a sailor is hardly mentioned. So in the Valkyrie series, it very much is, and they are sailing those ships. But to do that, I had to learn how to sail a tall ship, and that's very different from
Mhm.
sailing a dinghy. Because I'm used to a couple of triangular sails and an easy bit of rope work, but not with those big square sail ships with 2, 3 masts. No, I had to learn how to sail them. So and that wasn't easy, but I did find a series of books by a man called Alan Villiers. Now, he was one of the last clipper captains, and he
Mhm.
was still sailing clipper ships from Australia and around the world filled with wool in the 1930s. And he was also a photojournalist, so he documented his journeys and he documented how to sail those ships. So I learned the theory of how to sail them. So while I was writing them, I could name every single piece of rigging on those ships, every bit of rope, every sail, all of it. I'd struggle to now. I'd have to think a little bit, but it's all there, so I had to understand how it all worked. But that fascinated me, and that really kept me going through some quite dark days after I was injured.
I've been on like GW, but I remember one time my dad took me on a fishing boat out to Helensburgh, and
Right?
I think I lasted about 10 minutes, and that was me over that,
But,
waves and everything, and
yeah, yeah,
can't. I mean, as you
no,
say, the ship is highly mentioned, but
mm,
let's face it, if they're on land, they could just walk away.
yeah,
But if in the middle of the ocean, the sea, if there's something wrong with the ship,
yeah.
then you've nowhere to go.
Right. You've nowhere to go. If you have a problem with one of the crewmates, nowhere to go. Get on the wrong side of the captain, you're in trouble. Because pirate ships were the most democratic place, actually, possibly in the world, certainly in America,
Hmm.
because they voted their captain and the quartermaster, and so there wasn't the hierarchy that you would normally assume, and they even had a health insurance. So if somebody was injured on one of the attacks, they would get a reward from the treasure or from the proceeds to compensate for the injury.
So they
Uh,
were really. I mean, obviously everybody's seen the films of pirates and raiding other ships and just killing everybody, and
no.
they were really kind of civilized in a way, for want of a better word.
Somewhere, I think it got worse and worse as time went on. And when we think normally of the Pirates of the Caribbean, we're thinking more the early 1700s, when you've got Blackbeard, and you've got Captain Avery and Captain England, and there are an awful lot of them who are just out for themselves. And these books are set before all that, so it's very much, it's more privateers. So they have a license from the king, and they can attack the ships that England, because this is before the kingdom was united, so they could attack the ships belonging to anybody that England was at war with, and they had that was then their prize. They had the booty, and that was really the navy before Samuel Pepys really got together and put that together with the Admiralty Board. So this was a way of the king or queen having a navy, being able to trouble enemy ships all around the globe by giving people a license to be privateers. If they attacked a ship that they were not at war with, then they were pirates. And they did that, of course they did, because they were a long way away, and there wasn't great communication. They could get away with it, and they could really get away with it if nobody survived.
Exactly. Especially with no radios, no phones, no nothing. So if they came upon a ship in the middle of the Atlantic, for instance, they could, raid it, empty it, probably through the ship.
Yeah. And if they don't put the colours up, the colours of the flags, which would be the territory flag, so it would be the St George's Cross for England or the St Andrew's Cross for Scotland. If they didn't fly that, they could just fly a black flag or a red flag. Now, a black flag was bad enough, but the red flag, as I mentioned in that reading, meant that it was a warning not to resist. If you resist, we'll kill you all. If you don't resist, you've got a chance of living. So that was the way they did it. That's where the name, the Jolly Roger, for the pirate flag came, because it's for the French, for the red flag, the La Jolie Rouge. And as well, at this point in history, Spain were shipping an awful lot of gold, silver, emeralds, rubies, diamonds, all from the South Americas and from the Manila as well. They had a supply run, so the Manila galleons would come across to Panama. Those goods would then be taken across the Isthmus, as would silver and gold. They would all come to these ports where Spanish galleons would load up, and there'd be 2 treasure fleets every year going from New Spain back to Old Spain. So they're fair game, and they do, in Look Sharp, they do go after some of this treasure to get hold of it themselves, because the temptation must have been just unsurmountable, and they could get away with it.
But what about the old skull and cross? The skull and crossbones and the skull and swords. Did they flag actually exist? Were they used?
Oh, they did, yes. A little bit later on, with the like Blackbeard and the more famous pirates of the Caribbean, the real buccaneers, and yes, they would have their own symbols to warn, so that people would know. So they had their reputation. They built up their reputation. So if they flew that flag, and I think the closest to this, I can't remember. The skull and crossbones was used by one of them. I cannot remember which one it was. I think Blackbeard had a skeleton with a spear to stabbing someone. So they could be pretty graphic. There was they would have hourglasses as well to tell a prey that their time was running out. So they were promising death with those flags, and they each had their own designs once the pirating became big business.
And then
so there's quite a lot to actually understand as far as all the flags are concerned and stuff, because they're like calling cards, but they're also warnings as well. They
were warnings, yes. That was the whole point. When they got to be so big and so many of them, that they were England and Spain and France, they all had their own fleets and they all had their own pirates, and they were all struggling to really control them. And as more and more people were emigrating to the Americas and settling and making good money with sugar, with cotton, with tobacco, and the slave trade as well, of course. There was a lot of money around there. There was a lot of easy prey for somebody who was prepared to risk it all, and they did risk it all. Because even if there was a Coast Guard ship nearby or a Navy ship nearby, it would take a long time to actually find the right ship. And then you've got the chase at sea, and then you've got the seamanship comes into it, and just one wind shift and you're off. The rewards were worth the risks, and they chose for a short, jolly life rather than a long, slow, arduous, painful life, which was the other option for many of these men. And there were women there. There were women as well aboard these ships. I think the most famous is Anne Bonny. There's also Mary Read. And they're all over history and all around the world. There was very famous women pirates too. So it wasn't just the men. The women they had their hand in it as well.
I can understand now why you said you thought it would have been easier to work with the sea kind of thing, but obviously there's so much involved that you've got to make sure that you're getting that right as well.
Yes, and I do over research. I know why I over research, but I enjoy it, and it adds to the background. So the more knowledge that I have, and the solider my base knowledge is, the better the book will be. And then after it's written, I also have to fact check everything in there, everything. Because even things that I know, I have to check, because sometimes
double check it.
Yeah.
What's good about doing this book club is you give the background of the story. You know the time and the situation surrounding the passages that you're reading, and you're helping people that don't actually understand or never really listen to the subject. That you're giving them a wee bit of a motive and an understanding of the whole subject. Because I would never have really. I don't think I've ever read a book on people in boats. I've never really read that. But listening to you talking and listening to you explaining the different bits and bobs makes it more that I would actually go ahead and read them. Obviously, your books are going to be first, Karen.
Pardon?
Obviously, your books are going to be first.
Absolutely, hope so. Thank you, Shelley.
You made me say that twice, didn't you, Karen?
I did.
She liked the sound of it the first time, so I'll make it again. But I think we'll wrap it up there, ladies. That's nearly an hour and a half we've kept you prisoner for Karen. So as always, though, fantastic, absolutely amazing. You know, you're not just a very gifted and talented writer, you're a very gifted and talented storyteller.
Thank you.
Oh, you really do know how to tell a story, basically. But we'll just hold on you for a wee second or two after we come off. Thanks, Shelley, for coming along, though. Always a pleasure to see your wee cheery face.
Always a pleasure to be here and to see you, Karen, as well.
You too.
What about me?
Always a pleasure, pal. Always a pleasure.
Thank you, Scott.
Thanks very much. I'm only kidding. But everybody in the chat, thanks for coming in, folks. You'll see Karen back on Friday nights. We were saying with our PIH quiz, where Karen will be hosting the quiz. See how thick we really are, or how clever we really are. Who knows? But we're back again on Wednesday with Tim from Ghosted UK, who's also part of Para Unity, same as we are. So he's in again to say hello and just for a general catch up. We will be out doing another investigation at some point this week. Before we go, I just want to jump back to last night's investigation for whoever watched it. We had to cut it short, the location where the words where we found. We are looking into that, and we are going to be teaming up with another team probably the end of this week, hopefully, to get back to that location and do a double investigation, just so that we can see what kind of results we get and compare them and what have you. But the team member in question, they won't be getting anywhere near it until we're happy that it's all good for them. because I say last night, safety's number one. As it is with every other team, it's the safety of team members. And it might be nothing, it might just have been random words, but we feel it's good just to check it out as best we can before, you know, we do anything else, basically. So we will keep you updated on that. And we are checking out another location this week as well, aren't we, Shelley? It looks a good one.
Yep, possibly. We're in talks about that.
So I'll be on the Facebook page anyway. And that's it for the night. So again, Cam, thank you very much, doll. Remember, folks, our marathon live, you can win. I'm still here. You can win Karen's book. I've got to plug them again, though. I don't care. You can win the 2 books, Parliament of Roots and Murder by Witchcraft, all signed and neatly decorated. So don't forget that, folks. And hopefully we'll see you on Wednesday night. So till then, thanks, Sherry Roll. Take care and be safe.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everybody.
Thanks.
Take care.
Bye-bye.